It's a good thing I double checked on my footage. I somehow didn't do a review of Dr. No, which, in a ways, I consider that a good thing because, wow, this is a fantastic book. Moonraker is still probably my favorite James Bond novel, but this, I'm pretty sure this is second, maybe third. It's definitely in the top five, but this was really good. Of course, I guess I should mention I'm a bit biased as I'm a huge fan of the movie that the book is based upon. Even then, it's really kind of crazy how the book is pretty similar, but also very different from the movie. Anyways, Dr. No feels a bit like a direct sequel to Live and Let Die, as it makes a lot of references to this book, not only bringing back the character of Quarrel, but also Strangways, and the idea that both end up taking place in Jamaica. I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself. So we follow right along from the events of From Russia with Love, where Bond ends up being poisoned. He's slowly recovering in the hospital when the chief of staff reports to M's office. He's saying, "You're pushing your agents a little too hard and you may end up losing them." To which M starts going into a bit of a back and forth with this guy, saying, "Do you realize how much of the human body is really unnecessary? You could lose this much blood, you can only function on one kidney, one lung, you don't even really need your hair or any of this." However, he does end up bowing down a little bit, saying, "Alright, fine, you want me to give James Bond a break? I've got a good assignment for him. It takes place in Jamaica, it'll be just like a vacation. You happy?" "Yeah, okay." Bond is brought into M's office, still a little groggy from all the treatment that he's been receiving, but all in all, he has been cleared for active duty. But before going on this next mission, there is the subject of Bond's gun. Ordinarily, he carries a Beretta. However, M is saying that this gun is no longer useful for him, so he gives him two options: a Smith & Wesson and the Walther. And if you've seen the movie, you know that the Walther is the one that becomes the iconic firearm of James Bond. In the book, though, he ends up taking both. There is a bit of a regret having to say goodbye to his Beretta, though, as this is something that he had been using for the last 10 years on his assignments, and it's like saying goodbye to an old friend. However, he is able to do so, and from there he is given the details of his latest assignment. He is to investigate the disappearance of Strangways. Like I said, mentioned in Live and Let Die. Him and his secretary went missing one day, and it's up to Bond to figure out what happened. Bond starts rummaging through the files to try to get any sort of lead, when he asks a very important question. Was Strangways working on anything before he disappeared? To which everybody at the office is like, "Oh, not that case again." It had something to do with a rare species of bird known as the spoonbill. Apparently, they're an endangered species, and one day they showed up on a little island called Crab Key. Ordinarily, the island was uninhabited, except for one very mysterious Chinese person named Dr. No. He bought a good chunk of the island before World War II started, and started using it as a, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, granary. Basically, he's just collecting all the bird droppings and selling it for fertilizer. He made a ton of money of it, as there was quite a shortage when the war broke out. But afterwards, he's just been kind of scraping by. Well, on the other end of the island that's not part of his property, that is where the spoonbill started to nest. There were a few mysterious accidents that happened. So, the club that was in charge of conserving this bird was known as the Audubon Society, which, according to the file, was mostly a whole bunch of old American women. They set up a little bit of a camp there, and even had a bit of a plane come in to try to visit the island. However, mysteriously, the plane ended up not making its destination, and everybody was killed. And as for the camp itself, it was very desolate at the end, and there was one survivor, driven half by thirst as well as just the sun, claiming that a dragon came by into the camp and burned up everything. And then a few days later, he ended up dead in the hospital. There's not really a whole lot to go on, but Bond is introduced to an old friend of his, and it says, "Something smells." So I know that's a From Russia with Love reference, but come on, it's the direct sequel. So, Bond lands in Jamaica, alright. However, he is a little concerned when he sees a flashbulb go off in the distance to get a good picture of him. And then an interviewer from the Daily Gleamer comes up and saying, so how long are you going to be staying in Jamaica, Mr. Bond? To which James is like, news of my arrival must have leaked. This is not good for the opposition. And then it is followed by another bit of a hang-up. Quarrel is there, and he picks up James at the airport in Strangway's old car, which immediately the instinct in James' mind realizes that this is something that could be easily traceable. If he was given a car from the intelligence agency, that would be something that they wouldn't know the make, model, and license plate of. But Bond decides to go along with it, as apparently it's the only car in Kingston at the moment. As Bond and Quarrel start to drive to the hotel, Bond looks behind him to realize that they're being followed by an unmarked taxi. The instinct of suspicion is on Bond's side, and so he tells Quarrel to immediately take the fork on the right and then see where the pursuer goes from there. They wait off to the side to realize that the pursuer is in quite a hurry. Once again, just really circumstantial evidence. For Bond, he knows that something is very fishy. Next day, Bond decides to check in with Government House. Now, the person that is the governor, he's really just an old man just waiting to retire, and this is just his job until his retirement paperwork can come through. So he has very little patience and just dumps the case off to his secretary, Pledel Smith, I believe his name is. In fact, that's how it appears in the credits as well. He goes there to try to get the file on Dr. No as well as Crab Key. However, the files appear to be missing. They were originally at Strangway's. With Strangway's disappearance, the files are missing. However, there is at least a survey of what the island looked like. Once Bond gets back from Government House, he sees that there is a very nice basket of fruit there. Bond once again is immediately suspicious and starts inspecting every single article of fruit in that basket, until he realizes that there's a small pinhole inside one of the most delicious looking oranges. He immediately gives this basket of fruit to Pledel Smith to then be looked over. The next day the results come in, and Bond was right. They were filled with poison. This information Bond decides to keep away from Quarrel, as he knows that Quarrel is not only a little on the suspicious side, but even he feels very mysterious about this whole thing. They start up a bit of a training program, just like in Live and Let Die, to be able to make their way to Crab Key and just see what's going on, maybe confirm or deny these rumors of a dragon that burned down the Spoonbill camp, as well as get a more detailed picture of this Dr. No. During this training, Quarrel decides to take Bond out to a nice local eatery, where he bumps in to the mysterious woman that took the photo at the airport. Bond immediately calls for Quarrel to grab a hold of her, and they attempt an interrogation. This doesn't go anywhere, and instead, what she does is she takes a random flashbulb, smashes it against the table, and then rubs it against Quarrel's face. Even with all this blood drenching off his face, he's just like,
We don't get nothing out of this, gal. You want me to break around? Another time.
To which she gives the immortal line,
You'll be sorry. You'll all be sorry. Whack.
However, it's a bit more coarse in the book. With the training out of the way, the pair make their way to Crab Key. Before doing so, Quirrell is very on edge, especially with the rumors of dragons, and he wants to have a bit of a life insurance policy taken out in case the worst happens. Bond decides to humor Quirrell at this, but even that puts him a little on edge as well. For the most part, Crab Key is not a very luxurious place. It's really just one giant swamp. It's very difficult getting there, and it's very difficult navigating. Once the pair make it to the island under nightfall, they both decide to take a little bit of a rest. The next day, Bond awakes to the sound of singing off in the distance. Upon further investigation, he sees a beautiful woman, completely naked, except for her goggles, as well as a belt with a knife on it. There is just one flaw with her, though, and that is that her nose is broken. But Bond thinks that this is a bit more unique, as this is someone that can be more easily approachable. She is obviously gorgeous, but a lot of people would kind of see just the broken nose, but he's able to see everything, kind of a diamond in the rough. Bond talks to the girl, and they get a little bit of information about each other. She doesn't really have a whole lot of money to her name. She is trying her best to collect a whole bunch of seashells in order to maybe get enough money to be able to pay for her broken nose. Well, in the middle of this conversation, Quirrell comes onto the beach saying that they're coming. So the trio gather up as much as they can and hide under cover. And just in time, as a high-powered boat, which was military surplus from the British government, comes on by. The guy in the megaphone claims that they know they're there and they are about to open fire. Bond and Quirrell believe that he is just bluffing, and they decide to hide underneath the sand. A barrage of bullets swing everywhere, to which Bond recognizes the report of this weapon and realizes that this is also military surplus. After the firing, the guy in the boat simply says, "Well, if you're alive, we'll collect what's left of you with the dogs." The trio know that this means business, and the mysterious woman, named Honey Rider, is rather shocked by this, saying, "Well, it seemed like they could have killed us." To which Bond and Quirrell just look at each other going, "Yeah, she's too innocent. We can't tell her that this Dr. No is insane." They make their way to a swamp when the dogs start coming in. Honey has actually had some experience with these dogs before and is able to lead them into bog water, where the water will throw them off the scent. Bond then cuts out some reeds so that all three of them can have makeshift snorkels. They hide in a nearby tree until all the commotion dies down. Bond decides to take a look around, and it's a good thing he did, as there was one last guy that decided to go back and double check on the situation. Bond has to kill him, and then he tries to bury the body, to which this is the first time Honey has ever seen somebody die before, so this is quite a shocking revelation for her. Away in a fair bit of safety, they all decide to sit down and learn a little bit about each other. Bond only gives the idea that he's basically a policeman. Honey gives her story. Apparently the Riders were once a very prosperous family in Jamaica. In fact, they used to own a gigantic sugar plantation. However, by the time Honey's father inherited the property, there were just so many mortgages and so many things that fell into disrepair that they were basically broke. However, Honey still lived in the property. Her parents ended up dying young, and it was her nanny that was able to help see her off to adulthood. It is there that we get the story of the landlord. Well, apparently the landlord said that she could stay there as long as she did a few favors for him. She knew what this meant, and she attempted to attack him. However, that is where she got her broken nose. Out of an act of revenge,
I put a black widow spider underneath his mosquito net. female and they're the worst. It took him a whole week to die.
To which Bond is like, well, I guess you're not as innocent as I thought. The trio make their way further to the burned out remains of the camp that was to observe the Spoonbills. There are a few rations left behind, just really a can of baked beans, and there's some firewood from all the shanties that are left that they're able to cook it. However, they don't want to worry about smoke signals. They all decide to sleep for a little bit before they make their way closer to Dr. No's area of the island. Before they do so, they are attacked by the dragon. Bond can immediately tell by the way that this dragon is moving that it's really just a very elaborately disguised vehicle with a flamethrower on the front of it. However, this still very much poses a very big threat. Bond, as well as Quirrell, try their best to attack this vehicle by any means possible. They are able to take out the headlights, but the tires aren't bulletproof. Unfortunately, Quirrell is caught in the crossfire and is burned to a crisp. It's a good thing he took out that life insurance policy. And no matter what iteration for me, either it be the book or the movie, I honestly feel really sad to see this character go. He had a very unique charisma about him, a warmth, and it's just sad to just see him get killed off like that. In such a horrible way, too. The Riders of the Dragon come out, and they take Bond and Honey hostage. However, Bond wants to have one last goodbye with Quirrell. The guard is obviously very annoyed by this and takes a shot at him. However, as soon as Bond explains, the guard's like, we don't have like a wreath or anything, but sure, you want to say goodbye to the idiot, you could do so, but if you go too far, we're killing you. Bond says goodbye, and they are taken to Dr. No's headquarters. Now, the headquarters is very unique. At first, there is just this big door in the side of a mountain that they are led to, and on the inside, it's basically a 5-star hotel. The pair are met by receptionists, they are given their rooms, they are given clothes, and they are given a whole bunch of other amenities. Before they are settled in, hostesses say that Dr. No wants to have dinner with them, to which Bond accepts and gives his order. Honey, being unaccustomed to a life of luxury, doesn't really know what to go for, so Bond just simply orders on her behalf a very basic dish of, I believe, chicken marsala. Something very easy to like. The pair look around their rooms when both decide to have breakfast. Bond immediately figures out that the breakfast had been drugged, and they both fall asleep. While they are asleep, a mysterious figure dressed in a very similar way that I am, except he was wearing white, decides to take a look at his new guests. There's very little in the description, except instead of having hands, he basically has pincers like claws. Delicately, he inspects the pair and then leaves. They both awaken, get dressed, and they are ready for their dinner with Dr. No. Before even getting into the dining room, there is this beautiful mural on the wall. Or at least they think it's a mural, but upon further inspection, they realize that it is thick glass, and on the other side is the ocean. The two are spellbound for a long time, until behind them, there is a voice that says,
$1 million, Mr. Bond.
They both look around in shock to realize that this is their host. I could definitely say Dr. No sounds very terrifying in the book. Not only with the idea of having pincers instead of hands, but he towers at like 6'4". $1 million is the response to how much it costed him to engineer that marvelous piece of wall. They talk for a little bit, but Dr. No wants to save the bulk of their conversation for the meal. He does, however, start off with some drinks. Bond orders his trademark Vesper, while Honey goes for a very modest Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is not a sponsor, but in terms of the whole Pepsi versus Coke debate, I like Coca-Cola. At dinner, Dr. No goes over his story.
It was the unwanted child of a German missionary
He married a Chinese woman. Along the way, he figured out real quickly how to be able to survive on the streets and found his way into the Tong Society. After a while of building up his ranks within that society, he was able to take a good chunk of change and escape to the United States. However, the Tong Society does not forget, and they even had a chapter in the United States. They caught him, and much like Middle Eastern cultures, they cut off his hands to symbolize that he was a thief, and then afterwards, they shot him in the heart. Or at least they attempted to. He had a bit of a genetic defect where I guess his heart was not on the typical side, so the bullet passed through. Thankfully, with all his money, he was able to slowly recover himself, and from there, he started to just find his way within the country. He went to university and wanted to become a doctor because he was always very interested in what the limits of a human being are. And being a doctor, you're allowed to ask very probing questions as well as be able to do minute inspections on the patients. However, he also had to try to hide himself for a little bit because obviously the metal pincers for hands were a dead giveaway something was off. Since he couldn't grow any shorter, he grew taller, and that is why he is such a towering figure. And there, whatever money he had left, he founded this island. He was able to make quite a chunk of change off of the guano business, and on top of that, he has a bit of a side racket as well. He is toppling missiles. In collecting these missiles, he's able to get quite a chunk of change from the Russians. In hearing all this, Bond decides to try a little bit of banter. Since he realizes that he can't show force by telling him that his superiors already know where he is and that there's an army to attack, he attempts to just intimidate him, saying he is a maniac. To which Dr. No is just like, of course I'm a maniac. Anybody that wants to succeed in life has some sort of mania. He also very much describes how privacy is a very important thing to him. He hires very specific people, and they are never allowed to leave the island. As such, they never know that they can get better wages elsewhere, that they could be treated better elsewhere. When you just got this own little bubble of yours, the outside world doesn't exist. And as such, Dr. No is supreme ruler of this area. However, such conversation bores him, and Dr. No describes how he is going to kill both Bond and Honey. Bond is going to be put through a survival course. As I mentioned, Dr. No has always been curious to see what the limits of a person can be, and so he set up this course to see how much a person can push themselves before they end up dying. And as for Honey, she is slowly going to be devoured by a herd of ravenous black crab. In case you're wondering why it was called Crab Key after all. Both are taking their respective ways. We focus on Bond trying to get through the obstacle course. The first trick to soften Bond up was to have the entrance be to an air duct that is electrified. He just feels his hands tingling, but after realizing that he's just been softened up, decides to go for the course. There, he just has a lot of trudging to do through piping. He has to go up, he has to go down, and along the way it even starts to get hot. There is water that starts going through the way. And he also notices that there are these glowing red dots in the distance. Now, before going to the survival course, Bond wanted to make sure he was well equipped. He had two things, a lighter and a steak knife. And on top of that, he even fashioned a little bit of a spear from the electrical wire from that opening entrance. In inspecting these red dots, he finds that the whole area is filled with tarantulas. Bond is able to just destroy all of them into one giant bloody pulp. And then he makes his way to a giant chute that takes him down into a giant tank outside. He notices that there is a fence. However, Bond wonders if this is to keep something out or to keep something in. As if to respond to his question, a giant mass from underneath the waves starts to come up to reveal a giant squid. Already, he is just torn. He is completely broken down, and this is the very last gasp that he has to go through. Oh, it's quite a battle. He was able to use his necessary tools to take out the eye of the beast, and as such, ran away, completely soaking him head to toe in black ink. Outside of the beach, he decides to rest for a little while. As for how long, he is not really sure. But when he comes to, he realizes the sun is out and Honey is probably in danger. He makes his way to the Guanaria. He sees a forklift as well as Dr. No managing a shipment of incoming supplies. Sneakily, Bond is able to get to the top. Did I say forklift? I meant, I think crane would probably be the best way to explain it. Basically, it's like really high on stilts and it's used to like grab things. Bond is able to take care of the guard and is able to dispatch of Dr. No. Essentially, the crane was full of a fresh shipment of guano, and Bond just immediately dumps the entire thing on top of Dr. No, slowly drowning in a giant pile of bird feces. With Dr. No taken care of, Bond's next task is to try to retrieve what is left of Honey and escape the island. He's able to make his way down the corridors, maybe even taking out the odd guard here and there, when all of a sudden one of them lands right on top of Bond. Bond starts attacking when all of a sudden this guard lets out the attack right into the family jewels. This paralyzes Bond to realize that this uniform doesn't fit right, and lo and behold, it was Honey that dispatched him. With just a few minutes to be able to figure out what happened, Honey tells her story. Honey was very much a naturalist. She knew all about the animals of Jamaica, and she knew that the crabs would not eat a person. The only reason that the last person died was because she just died of fright, realizing what these crabs could have done to her. But Honey just simply waited there, stark naked, out of humiliation, I guess. And there were a few crabs that might have like pulled on her hair a little bit or might have tickled her, but that was about it. Once the crabs went their way, Honey was able to let loose of her bonds, found a uniform, and started making their way. From there, it is a slog to the finish. Taking out as many guards as Bond can, he's able to make his way back to the dragon, and that is how he is able to escape the island. From there, it is just a whole lot of cleanup, trying to make heads or tails of this whole situation. After that, Bond is given a fair bit of leave, to which he is in Honey's care of what's left of the plantation. From there, they enjoy each other's company, and that is the end of the book. Now, it's really quite interesting when comparing this to the movie because, as you may have been able to tell, there are quite a few similar story beats. The only things I forgot to mention, so how Strangways was taken care of. If you saw the movie, you will know that he is dispatched by 3 blind men, which the book has a bit more of a colorful description as to who these 3 blind mice are. He is shot by them at the Queen's Club, and then they go after his secretary. Now, the major difference between the two is that in the book, both of the bodies are dumped in a ravine, and then the house is set on fire. In the movie, they add in this extra character of Professor Dent, which I think this is a very good move. Really gives it a bit more of an idea of who this Dr. No is and how in the world he's able to instill this kind of fear in people. And plus, come on, that iconic scene of Bond killing Dent in cold blood. Brilliant. The other scene I forgot to mention is the nighttime scene. So in the movie, it's a tarantula that is sent to try to kill Bond. And it's funny that it's a tarantula because that's exactly what Bond had to fight on the survival course. In the book, it is a centipede, which I don't do well with the creepy crawlies. Like, if you ever see that one scene from Temple of Doom where Willie has to reach her hand into that insect infest, that makes me itch, and this definitely made me itch. But the scene plays out very similarly in both. In the movie, they really lean into this whole toppling thing. We really get to see Dr. No having a nuclear reactor, as well as just how he's able to do this toppling in the first place. And I do think it's a stroke of genius that the movie just starts off with Bond having to investigate the toppling rather than Strangways going missing. And the other big difference is the movie makes the swamp radioactive. As such, Bond and Honey have to be decontaminated. And as for why Dr. No doesn't have any hands, it's because of his knowledge of radioactivity. Although I do like the idea that they still have that nod to the Tong Society in the movie as well. And I still really don't know which is the more gruesome death, slowly drowning in a giant mound of bird guano, or slowly drowning in superheated radioactive water. And the other big difference as well is that they want to introduce us to the character of Felix Leiter, which makes sense. In the first book, Casino Royale, that is where the book readers are introduced to Felix. And since this is the first movie, they decided to shoehorn him in. Although it's quite fascinating to think that if it was a book-accurate Felix, he would only have one arm and one leg, which that would have been pretty difficult to explain to first-time moviegoers. So, that's Dr. No. It's one of my personal favorite movies, and I'd argue probably the most important James Bond movie of the series as well. It was the first. If it wasn't good enough, a whole series would not have come out of it. And on top of that, I feel like if they were going to reboot the franchise, I feel like this is the way to do it. Make it a bit more about the mystery. While I do like the spectacles and the gadgets, I do like the more simplified version of the story that's explained in Dr. No. And then I feel like it somehow goes a little bit more in the sequel from Rush of Love. Then from Goldfinger, that's when it started to get more to the cinematic Bond. But in these early entries, I feel like this is more the book Bond. I hope you will join me next time for Your Eyes Only. This is a very unique specimen compared to the rest of the books I've reviewed. As you can see right on the top, there are 5 James Bond thrillers. As the story goes, Ian was trying to figure out how to be able to make a TV series out of the character of James Bond. He wrote 5 episodes for it. However, no major network wanted to pick it up, so Ian just decided to add in a fair bit more description and wrote a book about it. Personally, I feel like if there was a show, I think it would have been awesome if it was animated in the style of Johnny Quest. At the same time, I could also see it working as like a Man from U.N.C.L.E. sort of show. Which is kind of crazy to think that if it wasn't for James Bond, that spy craze of the 60s probably wouldn't have happened. But anyway, I hope you will join me then. Until next time, keep having fun. I like having longer hair.